If we could only channel all our energy in any one direction, if, for example, we could learn with our whole being to say yes to life, instead of mixing so many yeses with nos, our powers of accomplishment would be greater than most people deem possible.
That's a very interesting episode, a similar experience that I had years ago. I always was, at least, a very bad sailor. And when I went out to Green Island on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, it was so beautiful and the weather was so beautiful, I decided not to go back as I'd been scheduled to, but to stay the night. The following day I had a lecture in Sydney, and I had to be back that day. But at least I thought, well, this one day of rest here will be perfect. It was. But the next day was absolutely vile. The weather was very, very bad. The ocean was very high, and I had no choice but to go back. And being a bad sailor, I thought I may get back alive, but I don't know how I'm going to lecture after I get back. And I remembered all the times I'd been ill on ships before when I was a child, because the way we would cross the Atlantic in those days was by ship. And I remembered that every time the prow of the boat would go up, I would mentally try to pull it down, and every time it went down, I'd try to mentally pull it up. And I thought, well, that's what I was doing wrong. Instead of trying to make it do something other than it's doing, let me just say yes to what it is doing. And so the boat going back from Green Island was making these horrendous corkscrew motions. It wasn't satisfied with just going one way. And every time it did, I'd say yes, and go with it instead of going against it. And I arrived, my willpower exhausted, but still feeling good. And it taught me a very good lesson. If we learn to go with the things that tire us in that example, or with the movements that upset us, or whatever it might be, then we will be able to survive. More than that, we'll be able to win, to learn, to come out victorious from the experience, and not to be really touched by it. But there's one other condition which wasn't mentioned in that path reading, and that is that there must be a still place within you that isn't going with it, that isn't resisting it, but that also isn't going with it. Otherwise, to just give a rather poor example in this case, but that corkscrew motion, if I'm absolutely committed to the corkscrew motion by saying yes to it and then it stops, maybe I'll feel badly because it's not moving anymore. Just as when the ship was going up, I wanted to pull it down. If I had gone with the up movement but not been able to go with the down movement, I would have started feeling badly when the ship went down. And so it is that very often people will have reached the point where they can say yes to certain things, but with so much identification with those things that they cannot go with the shifting tides. They're able to go with success in business, but they aren't able to go with failure. They're able to go with hard work, but they don't know how to relax. I was told by an airline pilot that the average life expectancy of a commercial airline pilot after he retires is about 2 years. Because he's so used to moving, his body's so accustomed to moving that he can't slow down. And when he does slow down, it's too harmful for him. He said he was planning to beat the system by continuing to travel after he retired. And I saw a friend of his the other day who said that he's still alive after 8 years of retirement. But the thing is that the only way that we can really win this battle is like a skier. A perfect example is the skier who is not committed to going down the hill necessarily in a straight line, but is centered in himself and is able, by that centeredness, to go with what happens, but at the same time be centered in such a way as to change his direction as he wills. And this is the trick of the spiritual path, that we want to completely go with what we have to do, say yes to our particular dharma or our spiritual duty, say yes to what God gives us to do, and yet at the same time know that none of it is really ourself.